Mini episode 1258 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1258. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here, and we are yet another part into our Coronavirus Crisis 2020 series. And this is going to be taking a look at the restart of the NBA in the bubble in Orlando. And I have with me here a longtime FDH Lounge dignitary and FDH NBA analyst Ben Chu, and this is not the first time we've looked at the NBA restart. We did a little bubble follies thing here recently, looking at some of the lighter side of the return to play during the bubble era of the NBA, if you want to call it, during this global pandemic. So we've already looked at that. There's a few new developments, of course, in that since the last time we talked, including a very notorious trip to a strip club that I'm sure we'll get into, but we are going to be predominantly today on-court focused, since we've covered a lot of the other material already, and sort of give you some thoughts on what we think might happen in this most unprecedented restart to the NBA season. And of course, for that, who better than my good friend Ben Chu. Ben, welcome back on, my friend. Good to talk hoops with you as always, brother.
It's always good to talk to you as usual, Rick. The visual check is still not cleared yet.
That's right. That's right. It may not clear anytime soon. We're in a global pandemic, brother. Times are tough all over. Yeah, ask Steve Mnuchin. I'm sure it's in the mail. But, so we, I had already alluded to it. We can get this out of the way. A little bit of continuity from last time when we were talking about the bubble follies here. Good old Sweet Lou Williams. And there was an article on CBSSports.com today that posited that him getting caught the way that he did sort of proves that the system works, and I guess you could say that. Unfortunately, at the most recent check, nobody inside the bubble has tested positive for coronavirus, so I guess you could say no harm done on that one there, but it's one of these things where it just makes you wonder when some of these guys are going to learn. I mean, just the fact that they're in Orlando in the first place, that we're having to do it this way with everything that's at stake. Again, nothing should be a surprise because of human nature, but it just makes you wonder if we've seen the last of this finally.
Well, I think it probably will be on some level, but it also is going to be interesting to see within the bubble, because I know players like Damian Lillard and I believe LeBron had a similar thing about it at some point too, is that there's question on how long players need this bubble for an extended period of time. In the short term, I don't think it'll be a major deal, Rick, but it's still going to take time for what truly needs to be done, just generally.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that you're looking at a situation here where, again, there's so much at stake with everybody going for a title right now, a lot of legacies on the line. But from a health perspective, you have a lot of older coaches in here, some executives that are inside the bubble. There are some people that are fairly vulnerable that are in there, and there are, of course, some NBA players that have some pre-existing conditions where it could be worse for them if they get it. So there's an awful lot at stake on almost every level you can think of right now.
Right, and I think the issue, too, is that I think we've already seen, especially Major League Baseball and the Marlins, testing issues, is that a minor spread can occur, but I would think, especially with how the bubble has worked so far, how the basketball tournament went through an entire bubble process, no one testing positive, mainly during the heat of the tournament in the bubble. It bodes well for the league, and I still think a major issue that I think they're going to have to deal with, I think, in the long run, is when teams are nearing the tail end of the playoffs, and it looks like the team is not going to win, and players will eventually just leave the premises or leave the bubble, making that assumption that their season is already over. But again, it's going to be weird, and going to be it's a playoff unlike any other, and it's going to just be an absolute joy to watch, and I think it's going to be intriguing to see how everything will play itself out.
It really is. And in terms of unlike no other, let's talk about a couple of specifics here, because you and I have talked about this extensively in some of our extensive off-air conversations, which we tend to do about hoops, life, and any number of things here. But in a more recent off-air conversation, we were speculating about some stuff that ended up being, great show fodder, not least of which, again, the fact that because of these unprecedented times, there's already a lot of chaos here. There's likely to not be a lot of continuity, and hence, coaches can play into this because if they want to roll the dice a little bit, if they're willing to do something that's a little bit unfamiliar and that they haven't practiced as much, you can really put the other team on your heels as far as not giving them anything to prepare for. There's a couple of circumstances here, and we'll build from probably the least speculative to the most speculative. One that we already know is on the record is that Philadelphia is going to be debuting a lineup of Ben Simmons moving to power forward, hence somewhat kind of taking the three-point thing a little bit out of the element as far as being a detriment to his game. Unless you're a stretch four, you're not exactly expected to put up threes. But Shake Milton coming into play, first string point guard. Ben Simmons, I understand, in the scrimmages is still walking it up the court a decent amount. You would expect him to be a lead or co-lead ball handler every time he's out there anyways. But Philly putting him at the four, it certainly helps them a lot defensively. It helps with their length, especially in that front court, and it gives teams, as we said, something they haven't seen before.
Right, Rick. And the major thing, too, was the rotation that just bumped Al Horford to the bench. They were, I believe I read a stat at some point, like with the combo of Embiid, Horford, and Simmons, the team had a net rating, I think, of over 5, just in terms of total points. And it's going to be interesting to see because Shake Milton definitely had considering it was such a long time ago, it feels like. Milton had a couple of good games. He had that follow performance against the Los Angeles Clippers, where he had 39 points. And it's going to be interesting because Philly's one of those weird teams. I remember I picked them to go to the finals earlier for one of our prior prediction shows. And they're a weird team in the East because the East, we all know the Bucks are great. The Raptors are going to be right there. Boston is definitely going to be competitive. But we're also going to see if Philly can put all the pieces together. They've been given some time, and one thing that people have been critical of Brett Brown, their head coach, is that he has been kind of sticking to certain lineups. It sort of seems like a different way and feel. And it's going to be interesting to see because it's very rare for Philly specifically. Like, they have elite talent all across the board. You got Simmons, you got Embiid, you got Eric, John Richardson, who has been solid this year. Milton, you have Ferdinand Korkmaz, you also have I can't speak again today, but you say Korkmaz once, and then your brain goes just still.
That's right.
Timeline. I mean, they got another couple other pieces. We'll see Alex Burke, the third, also coming off the bench. So technically, you would say this is Philly's deepest team in the Embiid Simmons era, and it's going to be very interesting to see because they can be, in my opinion, across the board, they can be a one and done, or they can make it to the Eastern Conference Finals and possibly the NBA Finals.
They are, yeah, and we're going to talk more about the path in the Eastern Conference here subsequently. That's an excellent point. Also in the Eastern Conference, a team that we're going to talk more about after we get past this part of the segment here in terms of talking about unusual lineups. The prohibitive favorite by many in the Eastern Conference, the Milwaukee Bucks, having a historically great season both offensively and defensively. And I saw an article again on CBSSports.com today talking about the success that they have had in playing the Greek Freak at the 5. And thus far, that's only been sort of a gimmick lineup seen here and there. But the author of the piece kind of posited that could be a big advantage for them if they wanted to go to that on a more regular basis. It gives you room to bring somebody like Kyle Korver off the bench, stretch the floor out even more. So Thoughts on that, and whether we could be seeing Giannis here possibly getting some serious minutes at the 5?
Well, I mean, I think Mike Budenholzer is one of the few head coaches out there who is willing to try new things, but he is very strict with his rotation, so it would not shock me if we see Giannis at the 5 a little bit. They do love Brook Lopez. We need to also know that Brook Lopez is probably going to be up for a Defensive Player of the Year nomination or a member of the All-Defensive team. And Milwaukee is in a weird position because they're clearly the prohibitive favorite in the Eastern Conference. Giannis really didn't log that many minutes during the season. He averaged, I believe, if I'm incorrect, ballparking it roughly around 30 or 31 minutes a game. Mm-hmm. And it's still going to be the prohibitive MVP winner this year. And it's going to be interesting for them because for the reseeding game, Milwaukee doesn't have a lot to play for. They still have sizable distance at this time over the Toronto Raptors, who are currently sitting in the 2 spot of about 6.5 games. So unless Milwaukee goes 8-0 and Toronto goes 8-0, they're going to hold the overall number 1 seed. It's going to be interesting because they have a very good team, but one argument that I've heard positive from some people is that Milwaukee is probably the one team out of all these teams that probably are going to get hurt by the most, because that home crowd in Milwaukee this season, they were fantastic. They landed at a 1.3, and outside of that little bit of lippiness with the Raptors Eastern Conference Final loss last year, that's a big reason why they were able to go up 2-0 to start, and then essentially against the store there. It's just going to be very interesting to see how Mike Budenholzer plays, just because that team is arguably the most balanced team in the league, with arguably the most talented player in the league at this current time.
Yeah, very much so. And again, I'll just ask you a follow-up here since we're talking about Milwaukee, and there's a theory that I've seen that another thing that could cause them some problems, like you said, they're going to have the end of their regular season basically just being mop-up games here. The first round, it will carry absolutely no drama whatsoever. They should sweep whoever they play with the kind of year that they're having. And then, boom, the likelihood in the second round, you could be getting the winner of, let's say, a Philadelphia-Miami series, which that team is going to be very fierce. Probably very tired coming out of that series, because that one could easily go 7. So you could have a team that's tired, but you're going to have a team that's hot, and you haven't had anything to play for since, February? January? Is there any kind of danger to that whatsoever?
I mean, there is danger to it. Anyone who says otherwise clearly hasn't watched NBA basketball in the last couple of years. But I think Milwaukee, again, I think there's a lot of people who are predicting that even if they get to the final, they'll get rolled by the Lakers or the Clippers or whoever comes out of the West. And I still think, at least judging from the scrimmage game so far, we haven't seen what Budenholzer is going to do for the regular season, but the Bucks have just looked dominant the entire time. And until proven otherwise, they can really do a little bit of everything. The only thing that you would argue is their weakness is their point guard play, but if you really look at the teams that will probably be there at the end, most likely, not a lot of them have really great point guards to really stand out.
That's
so,
right.
If I'm the Bucks, I'm going to just try and get through the first round. I think if I was if you put me into like the brain of Mike Budenholzer, I'd literally just tell him, like, look, these 8-seeding games do not matter. Let's just try and get Giannis some days off. Just give him some run when we need to give him run. And then just try to work on team continuity the rest of the way. Because at the end of the day, Giannis will probably be the reason if they win the NBA Finals or not. But moving forward, the more continuity you can have around him, the guys on that roster, guys like George Hill, guys like Eric Bledsoe, guys like Al Horford, guys like Dante DiVincenzo, who can help spread the floor, is going to make Giannis' job immensely easier.
That's right. That is a very good point. We move from the least speculative of some of the wild cards here to the most speculative, the one where I will say only half tongue-in-cheek, exclusive, must credit the FDH Lounge, because you and I were talking about this the other day off air, and I haven't really seen much in the way of speculation about it. We have seen, obviously, reports coming out of Orlando, and we've seen some video, and this is what prompted us to start talking this way, the way that Ball is playing for Denver. But the notion of actually giving him any kind of solid minutes in this run here for the end of the regular season and then the playoffs. You don't hear a lot of speculation that they might try and use him to any kind of significant degree because he wasn't a significant contributor to the team to this point, much less Michael Porter, who they are still kind of, easing into things here, treating with kid gloves because of his long-term potential. And you and I had both basically said that as talented as those guys are, yeah, it's a little bit of a risk, but in a way you're kind of playing with house money because nobody expects you, in the end, to get past the Lakers and the Clippers out there. They might expect you to win just about any other series, but certainly not to get past those two teams at this point with the year that they had had. Ironically, one of the issues that they'd had was the Joker not necessarily being in great shape the whole year. Unfortunately, after he got COVID, things might have gone too far the other way. Dude might be a little bit too lean and mean right now, but again, if you're Denver, as far as I'm concerned, and I think you had some of the same kind of thoughts here, based on what you're seeing in practice and based on, what your instincts are watching these guys, it would be really kind of unprecedented to throw something at the wall by changing up your rotation at this point and giving serious minutes to talented guys, but guys who've not been big contributors to this point. But if you're Denver, it might just be time to say what the hey, because they could be an X factor. And again, can't say this enough, other teams cannot prepare for what's coming because they haven't seen a rotation that fully includes those two guys.
Right, and we've seen Mike Malone as one of the very few head coaches from Mike Malone was always willing to take risks. He did that when he was the head coach of the Sacramento Kings as well. It's going to be interesting with Denver because, let's be honest, last year, professionally looking at the docket, we assumed that they were pretty much on a collision course with the Golden State Warriors for the Western Conference Finals, that is, and ultimately got ended by the Portland Trailblazers. It's going to be interesting with Denver because, again, like you said, it does kind of feel like for them it is a little bit of house money. There's no altitude, home-court advantage for them in the bubble. So it's going to be interesting when I see it. But like we've discussed off air, like you might as well take the risk because the worst-case scenario is that if it doesn't work, you're really playing, because I'll be honest, like some people at this point of the season, if you're looking at roughly the 8 teams, or let's just say let's just assume Memphis will take 8 teams. If you look at the 8 playoff teams right now, Denver probably doesn't even rank in the the top 4, for being honest. It's got teams we think can go all the way to the NBA Finals. So if I'm Denver, I'm willing to take a risk because the worst case scenario, the risk doesn't work out, or it doesn't work. And again, I'm not saying you completely change your lineup. I'm just saying you should give time and minutes to players who provide a distinct advantage. Another analysis to go back to the East, one of my discussions I've talked with people on there, Taco Fall with Boston. He provides such a significant size advantage. I'm kind of surprised Brad Stevens and other head coaches aren't going to give him like 5-minute bursts every game just to get a guaranteed 6 to 10 points a night.
Yeah, that would be pretty smart also, too, because, again, you have really an unprecedented opportunity here to really kind of screw things up for the other teams because of, again, the inherent disruptive nature of where we are. Nobody's been out there on the court for a couple of months. This is an interruption in the season, the likes of which we've never seen before. You basically have an in-season training camp, which is just wrapping up now. Chance to try a couple of different things. So, yeah, that is going to be one of the things to kind of keep an eye on because there are so many X factors here that we can't forecast. It's worth looking at the ones where if you squint hard enough, you might be able to see something here. So maybe some of these things we've speculated about will come to pass as teams are scratching for any kind of an edge that they can get. In a tournament, if you take away a couple of the favorites, Milwaukee and probably the 2 LA teams, them aside, everything else seems fairly wide open in the views of many. So as you did a second ago here, let's pivot back to the East and let's take a look at some of the other teams. We've already talked about Milwaukee in the context of Antetokounmpo and how key he is and the things that they might do. We already touched on Philadelphia and what their rotation is going to look like at this point. Teams out there that a lot of people think could be primed for making runs to the finals, or at least to the conference finals. Miami, Boston, which I'm kind of down on them just based on some of the vibes I'm kind of picking up off of them. And Toronto, which is a team that you've been consistent in saying for a long, long time, could be an actual legitimate threat to get past Milwaukee again, even without Kawhi this year.
Right, and I think the issue too is that the West seems more top-loaded than the East this year, but there's still some really good teams in the East. And I think a lot of us are trying to figure out, because for the talk of the neutral site, the bubble, and all these things, this would be one of the very few years where we probably will see maybe a team that isn't a 1 seed or an overall 2 seed kind of make it into the time, make it into the deeper conference and possibly NBA finals. Prior to the bubble, Rick, we've only had 2 teams in NBA history who have made the finals as a lower than a 4 seed. That was the Celtics in the mid-60s and the, well, actually, no, technically, I'll correct myself. There's only been 2 teams that have won a championship seeded lower than 4. That was the mid-60s Celtics team, I believe 64-65, and the Houston Rockets of 93-94.
Right.
And you would think this would be a year that this, like, someone outside the bubble would be, not outside the bubble, outside the top would be interesting. Miami's my most interesting case study because they, during the season, have a lot of the things that you would be able to stand with the Bucks. They have a great defender, Jimmy Butler. They have a team that's predicated on 3-point shooters, guys like Tyler Hero, Dominic Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, and they got, they have a big crowder in the deal with Memphis. So they have a long, pretty deep young team. Bam Adebayo fantastic this year and has a great room to grow moving forward. They're an interesting team also because they're just in the region. It's weird that people tend to undercut this idea, but it does make some logical sense. Is that if you play in a region and you're used to playing in an area or a state, you do kind of feel that narrative different. Like, I would make the argument like Portland's different than Denver, and Denver is different from Cleveland, and New York is different from Chicago. So they might have a little bit of a hometown advantage that might be a little bit different. I'd say the same thing for the Orlando Magic too, but they statistically at this point are probably not going to get past the first round because they'll probably have to face the 1 or 2 seed. But just to go quick and finish up on the Raptors really quickly, they seem to be like the most likely candidate to probably beat Milwaukee just because they have all the pieces still there. They got great depth. They have great coaching and Nick Nurse. They just seemingly that if you would think that the camaraderie they had together and just how they were, and again, this entire season they were injured. They're finally healthy. And it's going to be, in my opinion, if the team, most likely team that isn't Milwaukee Company will be the Raptors. They've already been battled since they've won a final. Sure, they lost Kawhi, but they won 46 games before the break this year, and they're probably barring some other gaining that's going to get some 50 wins again. So I would think they're the most likely candidate, but again, like you said, the Celtics, the Heat, and then the 76ers are all teams that are going to be good. Like I said, like we commented too, I'm a little bit down on the Celtics as well. Camaraderie and continuity is going to be a little bit of their issue, but you got to love their depth too. And they have just as good a chance as everyone, especially if Jason Tatum can sort of replicate the final 2 months of the season when he's pretty much playing like Kobe Bryant.
Yeah. So that is that's a consideration there as well. And Brad Stevens being the coach, you can never completely bet against them. But yeah, neither one of us, I think, likes their odds that much. I will say also, too, a couple other teams in the East that we are going to give short shrift to, like you said, Orlando. There's nothing that makes anybody think they can win a first-round series. Brooklyn, yeah, they might have KD and they might have Kyrie, but neither one of them is playing. They don't have a full deck to begin with. DeAndre Jordan won't be there either. Brooklyn will be first-round fodder for somebody. Not to mention they're on inexplicably a new head coach after canning Kenny Atkinson, something that doesn't make any more sense now than it did then. One thing that I want to touch on here, it's a logical segue point, not a team that I think is going to come out of the first round, but when you were talking about low-seeded teams that had at least made it to the finals, we must also mention the 1999 Ewing theory New York Knicks who made it there. And somebody who is not a Ewing theory candidate this year is Malcolm Brogdon. I continue to believe the Bucks would be even better. I mean, this was not addition by subtraction. They are doing it despite what I think was the boneheaded move in letting go of him. He's gone to Indiana. He's been good. We haven't gotten to see him with Oladipo very much. Oladipo, who had been hurt much of the year still, he was wobbly on whether or not he was going to go there. He is going to be there. this will be at least a taste of getting to see what it looks like with Brogdon and with Oladipo there. Both of those guys are guys that really need the ball in their hands a lot. But it's a little bit of a preview for next year and what could be a pretty tasty lineup for them if they can make those pieces fit together.
Yeah, I mean, in Indiana, I would say we like their chances a little bit better if Demontis Sabonis
Yes.
was going to play. He sadly is not going to be able to play. But let's not forget, Indiana's a very deep team. And do I think they'll win a playoff series? Will they go to Eastern Conference? Will they win a couple playoff series? Probably not, but let's be real. They have a very steady lineup of a lot of good guys, and Oladipo does always feel healthy and can play in these seeding games. They're going to be a really good team. And again, if I don't want to leave anyone out at this point. So Washington Wizards are a very weird team right now. They don't have Bradley Beal. They don't have Donovan Bertans, two of their top scorers. But I do want to note this, and we have to note this for the narrative, is that everyone has been saying that they're currently right now about 5.5 games out. Everyone's saying that they're essentially done. They were cannon fodder. I'm going to go with they're not cannon fodder because there's a scenario. Brooklyn is completely just off the rails at this point. They're trying to form a new lineup essentially around Carrick Clipper, guys like Tyler Johnson, Jamal Crawford, and Jared Allen. So overall, I think they're okay, but there's a perceptional scenario that I've seen already that the first game for the Brooklyn Nets is Washington. So if Washington beats them and wins game one, they just have to go about 4-3 the rest of the way and could hypothetically jump at the 8th seed. And Washington, I don't think they're going to shock Milwaukee, but I can see a scenario where they could steal a game or two just because of how good their offense can be at times. And Rui Hachimura has looked like a very good rookie for them, and they got competent scorers on that team. But like I said, I don't think they'll be cannon fodder, but it's going to be interesting cannon fodder. At least that's what I would say.
Yeah, and again, we've spent a lot of time, I'd say predominantly off air between the two of us, talking about the pace revolution in the game this year, particularly from a handicapping perspective. But Washington is still a team that can just play at an insane pace, and that is something that can destabilize
and
other
I think
teams.
one thing that we also should know, too, is that they are probably, this is a building year for them, especially with their new GM, Tommy Shepard, and they're going to also, moving forward, they're going to have John Wall back probably next season. So that team's going to look drastically different. So a lot of these guys like Darius Smith, Jerome Robinson, Isaac Bonga, Thomas Bryant. So they have a lot of good young guys, and I think if let's say a team like Orlando or Brooklyn falters along the way, they could hypothetically, they have enough time to get to the 7th seed and could possibly take a game or two from the seed in a higher seed.
Yeah, very possibly. And on that note, in terms of continuity, since we're looking at some of the lower teams in the East bracket here, let's start with that on the West before we work our way up to the actual contenders here. And when you're talking about teams where they're doing it a little bit ahead of where they were supposed to be, as you just were a second ago here, we can put both Memphis and New Orleans in that conversation, especially Memphis. Nobody expected them to be a playoff contender this quickly. You've got New Orleans, who's right there on the bubble, no pun intended. I'm sure they're going to be getting Zion back in there inside the bubble and getting ready to make a run. They've got a little bit of an impediment in terms of the number of teams that they have to run down in front of them, much less the games they have to run down to make it there. But the bottom of the West, as far as the playoff bracket, that's going to be probably the most interesting subplot, or at least tied for that, over these 8 regular season games.
Right, and I think that's going to be interesting, and obviously the marquee game that just even started off on Friday is going to be Portland versus Memphis, because if Portland wins that game, that's essentially they're going to be well within their weight up there. The question I think ultimately, we start with the Lakers at the beginning, is that it's going to be interesting to see, because prior to this, they were dealing with injuries to Zach Collins and Yusuf Nurkic, and they just overall at times looked very subpar. They did not play well, but with the acquisition of Carmelo Anthony and Hassan Whiteside, they both played well. They were able to weather the storm. Damian Lillard was pretty much supernova for most of January and February. So they'll have a very good chance at this current time we heard earlier in the week that there's, like Charles Barkley says, that they could possibly pull up to the Lakers in the first round. I think that's somewhat crazy, but I don't think it's even technically impossible, especially with the Lakers on at their best right now.
Well, they would be a fully formed unit as far as what they have versus the Lakers are still kind of a work in progress. They're going to have Rondo out probably into the beginning of September. So, I mean, that's if you're looking at any kind of a scenario, it would be that. I would be remiss if I didn't give a little salute there, being the good Bobcat that I am. You mentioned Gary Trent Jr. I gotta say, gotta love the son of the Shaq of the Mac. So I'm always happy to. Yeah, exactly. I'm always happy to hear him get represented.
I mean, if we're talking about Analyst, I mean, let's not forget the Pelicans are going to be really good. Zion at the teaching of this podcast or mini episode, essentially, it's still listed as unknown for tomorrow, but he's probably going to be playing for most of their games in the bubble. So it's going to be very interesting. I think New Orleans, this team, they look so far relatively prepared for their scrimmages. They're very deep. You got good guys on that roster, and that team can only get better. And again, one thing I do want to know, I don't think it's likely, but an intriguing team also is Sacramento. They're not that far behind. They're all essentially bunched in the same position.
Yeah, and
De'Aaron Fox can play well, and they can get along a little mini run. They can definitely find a way to knock off Memphis and some of the other teams ahead of them. Again, like we're going to say too, like, you know, there's also the Spurs and the Suns. I don't think either of them is just too much ground to cover. Like, you would need absolute tank jobs from the teams in front of you. But we've proven that it's very hard to bet against the from the games that I've seen in the scrimmages. Phoenix definitely look confident. They seem like a team that they are willing to go in and steal a couple of games and ruin someone's season and get ready for the following year.
Right. I think, and that's a scenario that a lot of teams, I think, are looking at, is that regardless of what happens here, maybe they can get a jump on what happens when the next season starts in December, whenever that may be, but that's another story for another day. So I think most of us would agree, perceptionally anyways, that in the Western Conference, we just got done talking about the third tier, which is basically 8 seed right now and below. And that perceptually, you have a lot of people thinking the two LA teams are at the top, and then in between seeds 3 through 7, and not that the Clippers are necessarily going to pull down the 2 seed, but could happen. But that would take some doing here to hold off the other teams. You have 5 teams in the way. You have perennial contender Houston, who again they really doubled down on small ball with their midseason trade of Capella here, and that's gone a little bit up and down. Plus, you got Westbrook coming down with the Rona. So Houston is a team where they might be a little bit more under the radar than usual because of some of their issues. You've got OKC, which has had a surprisingly good year with the revival of Chris Paul, with Gilgeous-Alexander molding with him very well there. You've got Utah, who's been kind of a frou-frou kind of pick in the Western Conference the last 2 years. And, of course, again, the obvious issues there. The reason we're here in the first place, the coronavirus crisis, and Rudy Gobert playing a role in that as far as helping to get the NBA shut down in the first place here. Donovan Mitchell, their biggest star, getting it as well. So some questions about Utah in that regard. And then, again, you've got another team in the mix, and we already talked about Denver before, but Dallas. And this is a thing where, and this is my moment to plug, if you go to the front page of FantasyDraftHelp.com, right there at the top, we got a link to our 2020 FDH NBA Restart cheat sheet here with our fantasy picks for the postseason, playoff predictions, and our ultimate quantitative baseline statistic for the regular season. A number of statistics, mostly advanced statistics here that we are using, mixing in our own power rankings and power rankings based on strength of schedule. I was shocked that Dallas came in as high as they were. They came in, again, the lowest number on this is the best. So they came in with the 4th lowest number in the league, i.e. 4th in the power rankings at 60. You've got Toronto 51, Milwaukee 54, LA Lakers 56, Dallas in at 60, ahead of Utah and Miami, both at 61, the Clippers at 68, Boston at 74, Denver 76, Oklahoma City 84. That's the end of the top tier. I guess let's start with Dallas and sort of take them unto themselves before we go back and talk about some of these other teams here. To me, Luka Doncic, skill-wise, you hate to put this on anybody, but he's the closest to LeBron that we've seen since LeBron came into the league as far as being a bigger guy with an all-around type game, which is basically that's the first description that anybody would put on LeBron. You use the same thing for Luka. How advanced he is in his second year, the partnership with Porzingis, the all-time great offense that they have. Defensively, nothing to write home about. And they're 17th in defensive rating, so when and if they go down, that's going to be what does it to them. But Dallas right now, I think, is better than they have any right to be, based on the curve of their progression.
Right, and a lot of people, too, I think, in Dallas is seen as a lower-ranked team, mainly because they were seen as the 7th seed. And remember, the tail end of the season, before the shutdown occurred, there were 6-4, but they had some impressive wins. They beat Denver on the night before the Nigel Bears tested positive. And just generally, they have a very deep team. Now, they are dealing with a bunch of injuries. We have to take that into consideration. No Jalen Brunson, no Dwight Powell, just no Dwight Powell. And it's going to be for them. It feels like they should be a trendier pick than people are discussing. But again, I see the issues that people are talking about. They don't have a great second or third guy defensively that will really be a shutdown guy. Guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Maxi Kleber are really good, solid defenders, but there's no sort of defensive stopper on that team. But if you look at their offensive rating, and we looked at, we discussed this off air, Rick. If you look down the list of NBA champions, every single one of them has had at least one top 5 MVP candidate, and we know Luka is definitely one of them. And with Porzingis, and weirdly enough, there you have a very solid team. Obviously, I know that the X factor for that might be Steph's brother, Steph Curry, who played well for Portland season, and it's definitely just during this sort of first go-around scrimmages has been on fire. He's averaging over 20 points a game at this point. And if Dallas can just, it's weird to say that the Clippers don't really seem like a matchup that they would want in the first round. So if they can get anybody else, I could see them going deep. I mean, if you're a gambler at heart, if you look at their odds, it's like 20 to 21 to 1. And with such a weird year and with a legitimate star like that, and with relatively decent depth, a great head coach in Rick Carlisle, and they're going to be very interesting. I think they're arguably they're the lowest seeded team that we look at now, and they're a low seed. But if you look at the difference between them and Denver, it's really 4 games. It's really not that big of a difference.
Absolutely. And in terms of the other teams on that sort of middle tier in the Western Conference, Utah, OKC, Houston. Any of those teams ones that you could make a decent case for even squeaking into the conference finals?
I think Houston's the most obvious one because whenever you have the top scorer in the NBA, James Harden and Russell Westbrook on your team are going to have an ability. They will be without Eric Gordon for a couple of weeks due to an injury he suffered last night in their scrimmage against Boston. The only concern I have with the Rockets right now is their depth. They don't have Mike D'Antoni usually keeps his rotations relatively small in the playoffs, and a guy like Gordon who wasn't really shooting well helped at least space the floor for them. And again, we've seen this happen before when a team is heavily relying on 2 guys who really need the rest of that roster to come out. Guys like Robert Covington, guys like PJ Tucker. But we've seen it before. They can score with the best of them. And I've always made this rule that if you're playing at a neutral site, Rick, offense will always travel. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're good running at the park in LA, you're good at running at the park in New York City. It's the same thing at the end of the day. Looking at a team like OKC is weirdly a misnomer for me because they've been unspeakably clutch this season. We got to give credit for Chris Paul, who a lot of us kind of wrote off. It's like, oh, he's going to go tagging me out with the money in OKC, but they've been fantastical. Dennis Schroeder is looking like the 6th man of the year at this time. And they have a good young deep roster still. Give credit to Sam Presti and the organization for still refilling the coffers of talent that they do have. But again, I find it hard for them to really make a jump because they did win a lot of close games, and OKC has a very good home record this make it to the next round, but they're going to get outfit by a better, more talented team that way, you know.
Yeah, I could see that being the case, definitely. And that takes us to what most people would think is the top of the conference. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it when you were talking about James Harden a second ago. May I say that I think 20 years from now, people will be saying, hey, you know, the GOAT, Kevin Porter Jr., back in 2019, Ben Chew compared him to James Harden. He knew what he was talking about. So.
And I mean, before we get to the top tier, one thing we should know is we should give credit to the Memphis Grizzlies. They've had a fantastic season.
Yeah.
John Moran has looked everything that he was up to. I'm only questionable because of that mid-season deal they ended up doing for Justice Winslow. They get a draft pick that they'll get to use in the near future, but losing Jay Crowder seemed to have impacted them a little bit. They were on a little bit of a wall at the end of the season. But they have a very good shot to even on Taylor Jenkins has been fantastic this year. If it wasn't for the fact that Nick Nurse and Billy Donovan have been doing great coaching jobs, he definitely would be up there in candidacy. And it would not shock me to see him go because John is a fantastic player and they got a lot of good guys around him. I just think when you have so many teams like New Orleans, Portland, and Sacramento nipping at your heels, and you're not exactly at your prime time best, I don't know if I can really trust them because of the timeline.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And yes, they deserve all the credit in the world for being where they're at right now. But the Battle of L.A., which, again, we haven't really seen them square off as much as we thought we would at this point. And of course, lest we forget, not merely because of the shutdown, but prior to that, that would have been the first game back, the Battle of L.A. for the Lakers. But it was canceled in the wake of the Kobe Bryant mourning earlier in the season. Hard to believe that was still in 2020. It's been a long, long year, and we're only a little bit over halfway through it calendar-wise. But there is every chance that even at the end of what has been one of the most bizarre seasons, if not the most bizarre in NBA history because of the circumstances, we may still come down to the Battle of L.A. At the beginning of the year, I would have given the edge to the Clippers. I'm not so sure at this point because of the Lakers have sort of surpassed what I thought they would be thus far this year. I thought they would struggle to incorporate everybody in here, and it continues to be a juggling act as we go along with the pieces that are sort of coming and going for them. So I've kind of switched the leaning towards the Lakers from the Clippers there, but I still have them as the top two teams in the West. What say you?
I mean, I think the major thing, and I essentially feel the same like you do right now, is that the Clippers, the issue I've had with the Clippers, it has nothing to do with Kawhi, it has nothing to do with Paul George, it has nothing to do with Doc Rivers. We know what they bring to the table already. My concern with that is just offensive continuity. I mean, Lou Williams is not going to be there for 2 games in the bubble due to the Magic City trip. Montrezl Harrell probably is most likely not going to play in the game tomorrow. They're still trying to determine his status. I mean, the question I ultimately have for the Clippers is that is their offensive continuity. They have a lot of great players and they score with bunches, but the thing that I am most concerned with them is in the bubble format, that sort of ability to shut teams down is probably not going to work as well because I think more teams are going to be more focused on their offense than their defense, and I don't think defense is really going to make that big of a hamper in this timeline. But again, I don't want to bet against Kawhi, and I don't want to bet against Paul George. But at this rate, continuity I think is going to be important moving forward for a lot of these teams because you're going to essentially have to jumpstart the season from the base, and you're going to have to try and know your teammates and understand how they're playing. So I think I would be under normal circumstances, like you said, I'd be more heavily Clippers, but I think the Lakers are just overperform. Got to give credit to Frank Vogel, who a lot of people thought he was going to get fired, and Jason Kidd would take over that job relatively quickly. Shown that they have just been an incredible team this year, and even though they don't
They have, and again, they really had an excellent regular season, even with all of their challenges leading up to this. And coming into the season, my pick in the finals was Clippers over Bucks, and yours, I remember, it was Philly and Denver. I don't remember who you had coming out on top.
I think it was Philly over Denver.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah.
I don't think I'm wrong.
Well, I got all the respect in the world because you went out on a limb. I went fairly chalk. I'm going to stay chalk with what I'm seeing here thus far. The two best teams have been the Bucks and the Lakers, and I think in the end the Bucks are going to be too much. So I will say Bucks over the Lakers in the finals. I do have Toronto making it to the Eastern Conference Finals and the Clippers making it to the Western Conference Finals. So in my book, the possibility of Kawhi versus Toronto in the finals will be looming almost until the very end. I don't think it'll come to that. I think it'll be Bucks over Lakers. I'm going to stay with the predictable scenario, the chalk scenario as things stand right now. How do you assess it looking at it, Ben?
This one's hard for me because, again, it seems like such a marked move to go Bucks Lakers, but at this point, unless I see something different, we're trending that way. One scenario I do see that I would think is different is that I could see a scenario where a team like Houston or Dallas, their offense gets hot and then just can make stuff work at the end of the day. But at this point, I hate to agree with you, Rick, but I'm going to go with Lakers Bucks at this point, and I think I agree with you again too. It's like it feels like a culmination for the Bucks finally, and I'm glad they're not going to play at home. It feels sort of like they're entitled at this point.
Absolutely, yes, and probably just the start of what will be a great run in Milwaukee. Of course, assuming that they lock down the Greek Freak subsequently, which will become a point of drama from here on in. Which, by the way, speaking of drama, in my predictions, what I have for the second round, tell me this wouldn't be one of the most epic second round series in many, many, many years. I have it being the Lakers and Dallas in the second round. Can you imagine LeBron v. Luka in the playoffs? That will be insane.
Right, and again, like we've already discussed multiple times, I still think there's a very good scenario that Dallas can make it out this year because, again, like we said, this is a weird timeline, it's a weird format, it's a neutral crowd, and I would always tend to believe that great offense is always going to trump in a neutral setting, and Dallas is just as good as any one of them. The only concern I have for them is it's just their depth, it's their defense at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But if they can figure it out, I mean, if there is a head coach who's already brought a team to a championship that you want to probably trust in the playoffs, it's Rick Carlisle.
Well, he is a veteran, and again, figuring it out, that's going to be the key to all of this here going forward. Uncharted territory, we've never seen anything like this. God willing, we'll never see anything like this ever again because it's pretty horrific circumstances. I mean, again, if these players could go out and play in a free society, we would all be doing much better right now. But this is the only way that we're going to get the NBA playoffs in and done. And thus far, again, the few breaches that we've had have not led to an outbreak yet. So let us hope and pray that that continues to be the case and that we get this in because certainly that is what this country needs at a time like this. We could definitely use getting to watch the NBA the rest of the way through. I know how much brighter your life has been, Ben, since even the practice games have come back. So, we'll see what happens through October here. An unprecedented time, but nobody better to talk about it with than you, my friend. So thank you, Ben Chu, again for being here today.
Well, no problem, Rick. And I have a feeling, too, more bubbles will be coming soon, so we'll be prepared to see.
Yeah, could be for the start of the next season. The NBA Players Union is already speculating about that for 2020/2021. So we shall see. Another story for another day. But in the meantime, this has been a great conversation, my friend. Thank you for being here. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1258.